Hi everyone, this is Dr. Essie Stacey, helping you to be well. Great, welcome Sue Bracci.
Hi everybody.
Hi everyone, welcome everyone. So the title of today's webinar is Little Kid, Big Kid, and how we get stuck in our subconscious. And I have the beautiful Sue Bracci to enlighten us on this topic. So Sue, start by introducing yourself. What do you do as your job?
Right, so my name's Sue Bracci and I do two things, but currently 4 days a week I work in children's services with the County Council, and I work with primary and secondary age children and families. So I work with the parents and school and the primary and secondary children. I'm in what's called the extended support team, so I'm an extended support practitioner. What that actually means is that I step outside into the realm of working out of the box to engage schools, children, and the parents working together where there's often been disengagement and brokenness. So that's what I do. That's what an extended support practitioner is. So often I'm working with children that have been excluded from school, either primary or secondary, and then I will help with the reintegration back into mainstream school.
And it sounds like a challenging job. How did you get into this type of work?
Somebody noticed that I was actually a very empathic person, which means that I really care, and it's sort of, they felt that was a gifting, that it was more something that could be used by the children's school and the parents to sort of build bridges, really. So it was just my personality to, I'm a bit of a rescuer, and also I've always done that. I rescue animals and people that often don't need rescuing, but that was in the past. But so they sort of noticed it as something within me that they could put to use with working with marginalised people. As it was then, I worked with some very marginalised, vulnerable people, and I started that way, and then it's involved to working with children's services in schools.
And I can imagine that you get some pretty challenging behaviours. What type of issues do you see in the children?
Anxiety, a lot of anxiety, and of course that hasn't been helped by the current climate, really. Anxiety, one of the things that can come out in is depression, self-harming, actually lack of school engagement, anger, violence, all of those sort of things, really, and more.
And the title of our webinar is Little Kid, Big Kid. Can you explain and elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes. Little kids become big kids, and what I've noticed in my own personal experience as well is that between the age of 0 and 6, we're like sponges. Our brains are in a theta mode, which means that we're highly impressionable. I mean, hypnotists use that theta mode to find out things, going back along our timeline of our life. And so what I noticed was, and I will come to it later, I'll show you the ACE study, but for now, just to say that we're very impressionable at that age, and often what we're programmed between the age of 0 and 6. And so that will manifest through teenage years, but to big kids as well, which is in effect us.
Yes, to adults. And so you've got children who are in primary going through traumatic experiences, I presume, and then how do you view that in the secondary school situation?
The main one that I find is lack of engagement. They just, in the end, they're angry. They're angry, and they don't want to know. And an awful lot of stuff, by the time I come to deal with the ones that are in secondary, a lot of things have happened in primary where they feel disconnected. You know, a lot of my young people are, there's an old saying we used to have about square pegs and round holes. And for a lot of my children, that's just how they feel. They just feel disconnected. Of course, then they don't want to attend. Then with the lack of attendance, then they become even more disconnected.
Wow. And then presumably that progresses on into adulthood, which is where I guess the big kid thing comes. What do you see? I mean, I know your job is working with the children, but I also know that you do work with adults as well. So this is sort of progresses on. Of course, if you don't deal with the emotions, you don't deal with the issues, they're going to stay with you, aren't they?
And so there's two differences with what I do, because what I do in schools is I'm working with young people and I've been called in to support them. And so a lot of the time, by then they don't want support, they don't want my help. So my first mission really is on my first visit to get them to agree to a second visit.
Wow.
It's as simple as that. It's just gaining their trust and hoping to find some common ground that we can connect, often outside of their problems, because I need to get relationship. I need to get it relational to get them to welcome my intervention, really. Yeah. And I must say, on the most part, I'm successful at that. Wow. But the big kids, working with the adults that I do, which is outside of my work with the county council, now I'm working with a very different people group, in that by then they recognise there are issues. They've tried lots of things but they want help. So in the schools, it's often a lot of time they're total shutdown, don't want help, angry. That's the little kids. Even the medium-sized kids, working the way through. When it comes to big kids, left school, gone into work, gone into relationships, multiple other life experiences, struggling in general, and they want help. So it's very different.
Yeah, and so you have this private business, which is aside from the stuff you're doing with the county council, called Subi TLC.
Yeah.
And what does that, what does that stand for?
What it means is, well, my name is Sue Bracci, and for a lot of times, spelling Sue Bracci, the Bracci part, and Subi is nice and easy. And so Subi, TLC, means something different. The normal word for TLC would be tender love and care, but I've changed it to temple love and care, because after all, we are temples, and our bodies are what we live in, something like our earth suit and our tent. And so for me, temple love and care, and it's learning how to treat ourselves with some TLC. Yeah. Being kind to ourselves, being understanding, some healthy self-love, caring for ourselves, because if we don't care for ourselves, especially if we're caregivers, we're inclined not to, but we must, because it's like the aeroplane. If you don't put the oxygen mask on yourself, you're not going to be able to put an oxygen mask on someone else. So first of all, it's about looking after ourselves and healing ourselves, and learning to love ourselves often. Yeah
It's quite interesting, because in the stuff that I do, where I'm looking at the gut and the brain and the HPA axis, so the hypothalamus pituitary axis, which is the stress axis. So there's that sort of relationship between cortisol levels, your stress, your gut, and the brain. And there's quite a lot of I say quite a lot. There's research suggesting that axis is programmed way in childhood with childhood trauma. So your stress, gut, brain axis is actually programmed right back then in childhood, which plays into what you're saying about the big kid. How did you start to work with the big kids?
My mess really was my message to other people, because I became quite an emotional mess, exhausted, tired, very, very tearful. And because I always wanted to end up in ministry, and one of the most devastating things that was ever said to me was, you can't help other people because you're too emotional. Well, then I learned actually that for me, being emotional was part of being a highly sensitive person and caring, so I couldn't separate the two. I am a highly sensitive person, but now I understand that I know how. I've got a toolkit for managing my sensitivity. What I mean by that is, if you're a highly sensitive person, you'll be with somebody and you start to feel their emotion. If they're sharing a story with you, it isn't just something you mentally connect with. You actually, in your soul, in the deep place of your soul, you feel for that person. And I've learned that is actually a blessing, but I manage it much better now. So really, it was learning about myself and my own mess, or what I thought was a mess, and my own healing, my own emotional healing, and understanding myself. And so that's the sort of journey I want to take others on, really.
And you have this, I think I can share a slide that you've got, the ACE slide, which is an interesting pyramid that you, I'll just switch to that.
Yeah.
Can you just talk us through this, adverse childhood experiences?
Yes,
Yeah.
what they did was they did a study in the 90s of the early childhood experience, and they called it adverse childhood experience, how they get the word ACE. And depending how many ACEs you had, and the questions range from emotional, did you experience as a child emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse? Was there household challenges? Like, did you experience it within your home growing up environment, domestic abuse, substance abuse? Was one of your primary carers, did they have mental illness? Did you have experience, whether your primary carers, because we know that it's not just parents, mums and dads. A lot of children now don't have mums, or they don't have dads. They could be chosen, and adopted children. But within all of that, did you experience the primary carers divorcing and not getting on, and lots of argument, or a parent that had gone to prison? The other one is neglect that they tested, and that was emotional neglect and physical neglect. But of course, we also know that there are other factors. So in this study, that was the factors they looked at. And they looked at whether in those adverse child experiences, depending how many you had, they worked out the likelihood of your outcomes of, say, lung disease, smoking, addictions, possible suicide attempts. Were you more prone to becoming a drug addict? Were you more likely to become sexually active early, before the age of 15? And so what they did was they felt that the nation's health, that's what they were looking at, that most people, 67%, had one ACE. That's one adverse childhood experience, that's 67%. Now, bearing in mind that when they did this study, they actually took a section of society that was actually quite well off. They didn't take the society, the vulnerable, the disconnected, the marginalised communities. If they did that, it would have been a lot higher.
Yeah.
So 67% of the fairly comfortable middle group of people is what they tested. They also, it was a very good test. They were saying that people with multiple ACEs could die, say, 20 years earlier. So their life expectancy, their health expectancy, their quality of life was all affected. But what it doesn't take into account, and this is what I love, this is the bit that I like to add in, is that yes, your primary carers may have been very dysfunctional, but there would have been one good auntie, or maybe a good grandparent, somebody that would help you balance and find a safe place. So the study didn't take any of that into account. So in itself, it was a very good study in the 90s, but it didn't account for, some positive experiences.
Nevertheless, I mean, it's quite shocking, isn't it?
Yeah.
That slide.
Yeah.
It is shocking.
Yeah.
Parental divorce. I mean, we tend to think of that as just normal now.
Yes.
And so you could have the parental divorce and some other experience, and then you're already on your way to increasing your chances of being ill. And that's the interesting thing, is that in your children that you see in the schools,
Yes.
what
Yeah.
kind of physical ailments are you seeing in them?
Well, just to give you an idea, if you look at the pyramid, the adverse child experiences, disrupted neurodevelopment.
Yeah.
That's one that is seen. The children can't concentrate so well, or they haven't got the same focusing. That they don't feel safe for a start. They're very disrupted in that, and that affects their neurodevelopment. Then you've got the social and emotional development. Some of them find it very difficult to make normal social relationships. They can be very disconnected and find friendship groups hard. Then you've got the health risk behaviours. So some of those children aren't. We have to looking at them being safe. So we'll do a risk assessment. Sometimes it's their own safety, it's keeping them safe, but then sometimes it's the safety of others around them. Then you've got the dis-ease that can start within them. I'd separate the two words deliberately. I don't just say disease, I say dis-ease. That dis-ease in them has multiple effects. One of the most major ones, as you know, is the gut health, because the nervous system, I had a Zyto scan, and it just shows so clearly that if you're unsettled in your nervous system, your gut health straight away is flagged up.
Yeah, that's because it's
by a nervous tummy, by having a nervous tummy, or always being unsettled. Your whole digestive system is knocked out of whack.
Yeah. That's huge. That slide is an eye opener, and it makes me feel very sad. But you're helping people, so that's great. So tell us about, you've developed a 12 module program, haven't you? Tell us about that.
Yeah, the reason I've done it in 12 modules, and it is quite long because it's a 12-month course. The reason I've done it like that is because the journey to dis-ease didn't happen in 5 minutes, as you can see just from a child. You've got the 0 to 6, and then you add to that your generational epigenetics. You add your own genetics. Then you add your life broken experiences, because we're so programmed negatively. We're more looking for the fight, flight response. We're always looking for danger. So our emotions are programmed that deal with. So you add to that your generational genetics, your epigenetics. Then you add your own life experiences. I felt that 12 months would be a bit of a journey, but also to go through. If you look at when you're looking at a diamond, it has different facets. Well, so does our health. We separate one from the other, but for me, the emotional and mental and the childhood experiences are a huge part of regaining our wellness step by step.
That's so good.
So I've done it in 12 steps.
Yeah, that's so good, because, and this is what I see in the patients that I look after with chronic, difficult to treat conditions, and this is why I've got you to talk, and I have Dr. Stephen and we have Barbara Pigeon talking about breathing, because you can't just deal with the physical symptoms if you don't deal with the underlying subconscious, as you say, generational. Maybe pick that up a little bit more. When you say generational epigenetics, what do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is what a child inherits. There was a really interesting study done on mice where they would introduce a smell and an electric shock. It doesn't sound fair. It wasn't a really, really bad electric shock, but they'd introduce a smell and then they'd give the mice an electric shock. And very soon they would smell the smell, and they would be the fear levels would rise, and they wouldn't get the electric shock. What they noticed was, though, that those mice would have baby mice, and those baby mice would still respond to the smell and the electric shock without the electric shock. So they would have a fear response that was inherited from their parents.
Yeah.
And so when I'm looking at taking somebody back along their own timeline, it is important that as we deal with the subconscious, that we look at some of the things from their mum and dad, if it's known. We look at what, their mum and dad, the trauma. For example, say a lot of the children that were from the Holocaust survivors, they inherited patterns of behaviour, and yet they weren't actually in the camps.
Yeah, that's so true. It's fascinating, isn't it? And there's a lot of research happening around this. Where does that come from? Because it's not actually a genetic thing. It's epigenetic, so it's outside of genetics. And there's a lot of research going on into water, which I'm interested in, which shows that water has memory. So is it that we're transferring that the memory in the water onto our offspring? There's also Rupert Sheldrake talks about morphogenic fields. So he's talking about memory being residing outside of the body, if you like, in an extended electromagnetic field, which then gets passed on or what have you. So this, I find, certainly with my patients, is if you do not deal with this huge area, then we get stuck. We get stuck in treatment. Treatment, from my perspective, might be relatively straightforward. I can put people on a diet and say, off you go, but something will make them get stuck. It might be they don't like the taste of the food, or they get doing so well, and right at the end, where we're just at the last bit, they just can't do it. All sorts of different reasons why not, and it's brought me back time and time again to the subconscious. So I know you've got a slide on. You use CBT, don't you?
Yes. Well, CBT is a great way. In schools we can use. I can use outside of schools. I can use other therapies, but as a way of explaining how powerful our feelings are to triggering emotions, to triggering behavior. It's a cycle to look at. Would you like me to find that one?
Oh yeah, you could do that, and just
Right, so I'm just going to put that up. Right, so this is can you see my screen?
Yes, it's a bit small, but it's good. We can see it. Behavior, feelings, thoughts. Yeah,
it's like an eternal cycle. So if we understand frequency, so we know that our thoughts affect our feelings, which affects our behavior. Now, the other thing is our core beliefs. Now, if I was to say to you, it's a bit of an ouch, really, because often I say to people, what are your core beliefs? After I've explained what I mean, because generally it's not a question you're asked. But actually, when I was asked it a few years ago, and this sort of started my journey, I got a shock what my core beliefs were. And it was a repetitive way of thinking. I didn't have to drill down too far. I had other issues deeper, but my core beliefs that were consciously there weren't far from the surface. And so with your core beliefs, that will affect, like you said about you put someone on a diet. Your core beliefs is not just a diet, it's a way of eating, it's a way of life for wellness. But if you start someone on that program and they have negative core beliefs about even failure, just one, well, I don't know why I bother doing anything, I'm going to fail anyway. You see, unless you address that, any goal you have or anything, you're going to self-sabotage at some stage. And that would have come from a very early age. That takes you back to little kid. Often that takes you back to little kid. You had a few life experiences and failures to that. And then that magnifies your little kid experience of, oh, I'm not good at anything. There's no point trying, I'm going to fail anyway.
Yeah, I get that.
I'm seeing that at a very young age with the little kids now. They'll say to me, well, there's no point. There's no point. I'm not going to be any good anyway. I'm no good anyway. Or, at a very early age in primary. By the time they're in secondary, they're very angry.
Wow. And so And you're using the CBT. And so from that, you're saying that thoughts are triggers to
Yeah,
feelings
yeah,
and feelings to behavior. So can you tell us more about the triggers then?
yes. The triggers are, I'll show you something here. This is the sort of thing that can happen. So I use this in schools with the young people, and it's very interesting because their behaviour can be quite atrocious. And if you ask them, what started that? You know, how were you feeling when you kicked that chair over, or when you decided that you were going to, on purpose, get yourself excluded, for example? And you'd normally find that one of the ones, because there's obviously you've got your very outward going children, your extroverts, and then you've got your introverts. So again, you're going to drill down and actually find two very different responses. So for an introvert, they could say, well, I felt I couldn't speak up. So what happens is, because they've been shut down, or they feel that they're never listened to, or they couldn't speak up, they will explode. They will just have like a horse, really, where it'll start bucking or rear. You know, they just have this external appearance of violence, but actually, if you drill down, it was because they felt they couldn't speak up and they didn't know how to articulate it, so they got angry. And then, so again, you got the feeling, you know, they're thinking a certain way, then they've got this very powerful feeling that comes in, and then they've got the behavior because they have to release that energy somehow.
That's interesting. It reminds me, your triggered list reminds me of it's something I ask people to do when they're snacking and they're reaching for the chocolates, or they've had a wonderful meal and then they need to go and have a packet of crisps. Is I try and get, and I think it was you that put me onto this. Is journaling.
Absolutely,
Is
yeah. It's
telling
a really
people to
important part.
journal. Yeah. And I basically tell them, at the end of the day, journal, write the stuff down. There's something about writing it down that is different from speaking it, isn't there? If you could you
Yeah,
explain that a little bit?
yeah. So when you're journaling, you are taking thoughts captive. Basically, that's how I like to put it. You're actually doing an action to say, you're going to identify what the internal dialogue is at the time that is causing you to trigger to be comforted. Basically, you're using food not as a fuel. You're actually using it for comfort at that particular point. So what you need to do is identify, well, what am I feeling?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a need to be comforted, but underneath that need to be comforted, or that anger, like you've got the anger volcano or the anger iceberg. You see the tip of the iceberg, but actually under that iceberg, there's a lot of stuff going on that you can't see. And it's identifying it. Now, some people can identify it easier than others. Some people need me to help them with a one-to-one to start the process. If you've never done it before, it can be quite, I say to someone, well, journal and write it down. Even that can be overwhelming. For somebody that's very broken and a lot of fragments around in their mind, to actually start getting it down on paper. Even silly things like, well, how do I write it? And so I have to explain, well, you're going to do like a mind dump on paper. It doesn't have to look like anything. You can write, I felt this, I felt that. Why did you feel this? It doesn't have to be in a sentence. It doesn't have to be neat. You just need to get it out there, and you need to get it on a piece of paper. I sometimes say, look, write a circle in the middle. This is your thoughts. This is your mind, not your brain. This is your mind. And then we're going to look at what your internal dialogue is. What are you hearing? What are you thinking? What are you saying? And then you write those things down. What am I hearing? What am I thinking? What am I saying? And so very soon you start to get a picture. Can I give you just an example?
Yeah.
When because being a highly sensitive person, what can happen? You trigger very easily, and you're constantly thinking things, and some of it's very distorted, especially if you feel you're being rejected, overlooked, not heard, or whatever. or you can feel very small around people. You can feel everybody else is great and they're up here, they're all clever, but actually no matter what I do. Now there's an example. No matter what I do, I'm overlooked. No matter what I do, I'm not going to be as good as. So straight away you're feeling small. So there's lots of feelings. You're feeling overlooked, you're feeling despair, no hope. There's so much that goes to actually getting it out on paper, but some people need help with doing that. So for me, when I was very fragmented, a lot of the thoughts that would come to me many, many times was, oh, you're just stupid. You're just stupid. Well, if I really rationalise that, I'm not stupid. I know I'm not stupid. But that internal dialogue, that voice that would be triggered by some event, was quite repetitive. So once I realised it, I was able to take it captive, and then I have ways of reprogramming, a bit like a computer. You know, we can make new neural pathways, but that's where I discovered actually that aroma can help with the limbic part of the brain. So that's another story. But so one of the tools I use, or the main tool I use, is identifying where the issue is with aroma, reprogramming and restoring.
So you use, when you're saying aroma, you mean essential oils?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're...
Yeah. And therapeutic quality ones, not adulterated ones that can cause quite a lot of harm because you don't know what you're breathing in. So, yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? Because they are bioactive substances.
Yes.
People often just think, oh well, it's an essential oil. It's it's rosemary or something like that.
Yeah.
But actually, when you look at the research, they are powerful bioactive substances, which actually big pharma, then they'll take what they call their active substance and make it into a drug, which, because they've separated it from the rest of the substances, then has many side effects. But you're saying you're actually using some essential oils. Just explain that a little bit more. What do you do?
Well, the chemical compounds that are in the essential oils, and they are living oils, the proper therapeutic ones are, and so you have something called phenols, something called sesquiterpenes, and something called monoterpenes, and they all have different actions. And so like the phenols, what they'll do is they will work in your limbic area of your brain, and they unlock memories because they can cross the blood-brain barrier. So they actually access that part of your brain in the limbic system where memories are stored. So, and emotions. So that's why you could be walking down the road and you smell something and it will just send you back. You will get a memory. Well, that's the sort of thing that happens. So a bit like in a computer, you find where the virus is, and then you're going to reprogram it, and then you do a restore. It's no different with our limbic system, and using the right chemical compounds. So we've got, as I say, the phenols will be the identification, the sesquiterpenes will do reprogramming, and then the restoration is the monoterpenes. I know that's a big mouthful, but to give you an example, frankincense is just one of those oils, which is a very powerful oil on its own.
Fantastic. Yeah. So, and this is all part of the program that you do, this 12 step program. And one of the things you mentioned to me previously was about the flight, fright, freeze response, and how that plays into anxiety and sleeplessness. I mean, I see a lot in my patients insomnia. It's almost, I wouldn't say 100%, but a vast majority of people have, along with their constipation and their fatigue, insomnia. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, remind me to come back to constipation because that's important. I've got a good one on that. So, right, fight, flight, freeze. Huge these days. Fight, flight, freeze is a stress response to danger. Fight, flight, freeze goes back to hunter-gatherer, looking out for danger. So it's ingrained into us. It's in our psyche. It's who we are. So we're looking for danger to keep ourselves safe. And it works through generally the amygdala part of the brain, which is, in schools they call it the reptilian part, which is, but anyway. So that part of the brain, if it goes into fight, flight, freeze, when you go into fight, flight, freeze, your whole body systems that aren't important shut down so you can run. So that was when there was saber-toothed tigers around. And one of the things that shuts down is your digestive system and your immune system. Yeah. That is why getting into a state of fear is so harmful. So once you understand that, you need to address, well, where I know now that I'm in this high stress response. Some people call it a jacked up state. Now, some people get into fight, flight, freeze anxiety and they stay there. And they're exhausted. They're running down their adrenals. They're absolutely exhausted because they don't know how to get out of it. One of the most simple things that I teach people to do, and this I do with the young people because anxiety is so high, and a lot of my young children have got dreadful digestive disorders, you know, and low immunity. They catch everything. Their states of anxiety are so high. So whether they're a little kid or a big kid, that's true. Little kid are big kids. So the little kid, I teach them some really fun breathing exercises. And I've got some great resources for this, you know, breathing. You can be a warrior, you can be all sorts of things. But really what I'm getting through in a fun way is to re-regulate your nervous system and to come out of fight, flight response, freeze responses. You've got to breathe.
Yeah.
And not just any old breathing. You've got to do slow breathing. It is so important. Everything's in the breath, as we know. But for a child, just to teach them to come back to a safe place and how they can do that, to calm everything down just by breathing, slow breathing.
Yeah.
And we use a square sometimes. So we'll breathe in. We'll hold it, so we breathe in for 4, we hold it for 4, we breathe out for 4, and then we just leave it, and then we breathe in. So we're actually showing them, and so they're listening to they're focusing on their breath.
It's so
and as they
interesting.
focus on their breath, just sort of flicks a switch.
Yeah.
The body's amazing, isn't it? It's just to get them out of that fight, flight, freeze response.
It's incredible that children are not taught, we are not taught how to breathe. And it's one of the things I've got Barbara Pridgeon on another webinar just talking about breathing. And it seems incredible that we're not taught how to breathe. And we can assume that all breathing is the same.
No.
When obviously it's not, and it affects our well-being.
Well, a little example of this, again, I'm going back some years when I was very fragmented in my mind, my emotions, this highly sensitive person. You can imagine living in a world full of noise from everywhere, and then my own different experiences. So I go into hospital to have a shoulder operation, and she takes my blood levels and she said, your oxygen levels are low. And I'm thinking, how did she tell that out on my blood? I mean, obviously now I know. And so she got me to breathe deeply and explain to me that I'd only been breathing into my chest, not even much further than my chest. And she showed me to breathe right down to the bottom of my lungs, to fill my lungs up so that my stomach came up. And then she showed me my oxygen levels in my blood. So simple. So my thinking cleared. You know, I used to suffer with a lot of foggy brain and dizziness.
It's fantastic.
Just from running on very low oxygen levels. That's without the fight, flight and freeze, anxiety, stress of life.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating, isn't it? How it all plays in together, and the research on the gut shows that actually the cortisol can be produced from the gut. Most people think it's just from the adrenal glands, but it can be produced from the gut. And if then you are in this flight, freeze state, then that causes all your other, your gonads, your ovaries, your testes, everything to shut down, because you've got this high level of cortisol being produced in your gut. And the rest of the body's like, well, I don't need to be on because gut's got it all.
Yeah, because you're running from danger, perceived danger. And so if say, for example, how someone in the modern day could relate to that is going from crisis to crisis. They're now expecting crisis because they go from crisis to crisis in their everyday life. What they don't realise is that they are constantly in fight, flight and freeze. And it's exhausting.
Yeah.
Mentally, physically, it affects every part of you.
So for you, your program is a sort of a reset, a reprogramming of the individual. And how does that work? Can you do it on Skype, remotely? How does
I can.
yeah.
What I do, I do a video, and I will be introducing each month the subject. And it's the start of the journey is often, well, let's start. Let's look at what's going on in your head, and let's help somebody. So I support them. First of all, to lay the foundation, to understand a bit of what we're going to encounter on the journey and why we're doing the journey in the first place. How this will reset you, how you can learn ways to manage, what toolkit we'll find for your I call it a wrap at the end. It's a wellness recovery, actually wellness restoration action plan. So that's what we're going to be developing along the way, your own personal wellness recovery action plan. And the first thing we need to do is identify where the issues are. So you may have there'll be all sorts of things in the first consultation. So I'll be doing some online to explain that to everybody what we're doing. That'll be a once a month video. And then it'll be personalised into one-to-one. Well, how does that break down to you? Because we're all unique. Okay, so I'll be getting somebody to identify what their, say, internal repetitive dialogue is, what their negative core beliefs are. So we start the journey. Where we end up is a totally different place. I hope with a full understanding of why they've gone on the journey in the first place. But as I say, most people that actually all the people that I deal with out of school is people that recognise they need help. Maybe they've tried a lot of things. They've got a repetitive pattern going on in their life and they can't seem to stop it.
Like what? So, what kind of things are they coming to you with?
Okay, so there's quite a few things you could break down of that diamond, really. So you've got relationships is one group. Then you've got finances is another group. Work-based patterns, maybe not being able to hold down a job.
Yeah.
Social friendship problems and issues.
Yeah.
Repetitive patterns in that, having a best friend and then having a huge fallout, or just going from crisis to crisis.
Yeah.
And that's a huge issue for a lot of my families, going from crisis to crisis. Their whole life is just chaotic.
And I can imagine the lockdown, it's just exacerbated that, surely.
Well, you can imagine the fear levels as well. So a lot of people now are stuck in fight, flight and freeze without knowing it, which means they're getting more digestive issues, which means they're picking up more things because their resistance is low.
Yeah. Amazing.
And the high stress, more arguments at home, finding it difficult to manage.
It's just amazing. So, Sue, how do people get hold of you?
Right, so how they get hold of me is they can email me on templecare@outlook.com.
Okay, I've put that on the screen there, templecare@outlook.com. Great.
And they can also contact me via text on my mobile number, which is 07766.
I won't write that in there because it's going to go online, but maybe.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. So templecare@outlook.com.
Let them email you on that. And then you can give them all the details.
I'll filter in that as a priority.
Yeah.
Now, can I just give you another example of the sort of triggers and things that can happen in the body, which you would be well aware of, but somebody listening. One of the things I'm seeing more and more is chronic fatigue syndrome and tiredness. Now, that we know is linked in with fight, flight and freeze, but a lot of people don't know that. They're just living their life and they don't get, why am I tired all the time? It's quite easy to untangle, but there's a really good book and it's called When the Body Says No. And I sadly have experience of people's bodies just going into shutdown. And again, if you drill down, it's a mental, metaphysical, often a metaphysical response. What is going on in the mind? What is going on in the subconscious? Why are the bodies shutting down? Why is this happening? So I do look at that, and that is quite a big part of what I do. I look at what's happening in the body, and then I route it back to what's happening in the mind.
Yeah, fantastic. Well,
I do
Sue.
have one slide just to show on that. Can I show that slide?
Yeah,
This is
absolutely.
this is. I love this one. Look. Right. Think of yourself as a human magnet, constantly attracting what you speak, think, and feel.
Yeah,
So
so good. Yeah. There's a
yeah,
lot in that, isn't there? That
there's
we
a
could
lot in
talk
there.
on that just on its own. But I think, we are coming to a close. We're around 45 minutes. I think that's
Yep.
been a great look at what you do, an overview of what you do. So I'm sure you're going to get people contacting you to help them. As I said, I think that health, sometimes the symptoms of ill health, the physical symptoms, have people running to people like me, doctors. But in fact, more and more, what I'm seeing is that people are not going to get past, particularly chronic ill health, without people like you. So well
Yeah.
done for what you do. Keep doing it. And yeah,
I'm going
hopefully
to
we'll
be
have you on
starting.
again.
I'm going to be starting my next round in October. I'm picking up the next batch of people for 12 months in October. I've also got some great lodge 3-day and 4-day one-to-one retreats happening. I'm in the Eastbourne area, staying in a lodge, and then I do one-to-one treatments over 3 days. So they're coming up November and December, but October is the online course
Right.
starting.
So people can contact you to find your next course and
Yes,
also to do this one-to-one residential. Yeah, and
yeah,
you're near the sea there, aren't you? So
yes,
a
yes. So
wonderful
journaling, beach walks, got a swimming pool, got a gym, and yeah, 3 days of
fantastic.
treatment with me to unpick some stuff one to one. If yeah, yeah, mainly ladies at the moment on that, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Okay.
would be ladies course. Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you, Sue Bracci.
Yeah, it's been good. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
That's it for now, everyone. Remember, change starts with you. Be well.